Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into chapter 17 of the Quran.
It's a night journey.
Yeah, night journey. And this one, it's got a lot packed in.
Yeah.
Stories about prophets, what it means to live a good life, how to be a good person, and then this whole thing about this mysterious night journey.
Who took it, right? And what it means.
Yeah, exactly. So much to unpack. Let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
So the very first verse, it talks about this trip.
Yeah, a journey.
A journey, exactly. From the sacred mosque to the farthest mosque.
The farthest mosque, right?
But here's the thing. It just says a servant is making this journey. Doesn't say who, doesn't give any more details. Almost like it's on purpose, to make you wonder.
It totally makes you want to know more. Who is this servant? Why are they important enough for this journey?
Right. And then, where are these mosques? The sacred mosque, the farthest mosque, what are those places?
You can't help but think about that, too. What makes them so special?
And then it mentions wonders that were shown. Come on, now you've got to know. What wonders? Were they like things you could actually see, or like a spiritual thing?
Definitely leaves you hanging.
Yeah. Well, before we get to all that,
right,
the chapter sort of switches gears, and it talks about the children of Israel.
Verses 2 through 8.
Yeah. And it's like a really big lesson about what you do and what happens because of it. Your actions have consequences.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, it can be a little bit scary. It's a warning,
It is, yeah.
But it's also reminding you that even when you make mistakes, God's mercy is still there.
It's about that balance, right, between justice and mercy.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've seen how what people did in the past had consequences. Then the chapter goes on to talk about the Quran itself.
Yes, it shifts to the book itself, like a guide.
Like a guidebook, yeah, for how we should live.
Verses 9 and 10, that's where it talks about this. It says, it's a guide to being good, doing the right thing. And if you follow it, there's a reward. But it also says really clearly that if you don't believe, if you reject all that, well, it's not going to be good.
Yeah. Interesting, though, how right after talking about being good and getting rewards, it talks about us, people, and how we can be good and bad.
You're talking about verses 11 to 15.
Yeah. Like sometimes you pray for good things to happen, but then other times you wish bad things on someone. We've all done it, right?
It's true. This part of the chapter is really about that, how we have both good and bad in us.
It's saying we're responsible for what we do, too. Nobody else can carry that weight for us.
Totally. And it connects to this bigger idea that's all over the Quran, this idea of divine justice. Verses 16 and 17, that's where it talks about God destroying whole cities that were bad.
Yeah, cities that disobeyed.
Makes it clear that God sees everything and will make things right in the end.
It definitely makes you think twice about what you do.
Especially when you remember how people in the past were wiped out because they were bad. Those warnings, they're not just empty threats.
Right. Okay, so how are we supposed to live knowing all this? It's like, do you focus on just living now or preparing for what happens after you die?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
Verses 18 to 21, that's where they talk about that. They compare people who just go after worldly pleasures to those who are thinking about the afterlife, what's going to happen next.
The message is pretty clear there. Make sure you're doing things that build a solid foundation for the next life. Focus on what truly matters.
It's not saying you can't enjoy your life, right? But just don't forget about the big picture.
Exactly. And even though the afterlife is the ultimate goal, remember, God gives blessings in this life too. Everyone gets to experience that.
So it's about finding that balance, right?
Right. And the chapter is really clear that the rewards and how high you rank in the afterlife, they're way better than anything you could have here.
Okay, so now we know how important it is to live a good life and focus on the afterlife. But how do you actually do that? Where's the instruction manual?
That's where those verses 22 through 39 come in. It's actually a pretty detailed list of things to do and not do.
It's not just vague advice. It gets specific.
Right. Because it's meant to be a practical guide, how to build a life that's moral and fair.
Okay, give me the highlights.
First and most important, worship only Allah. That's the foundation.
Makes sense.
So what else?
Honoring your parents, that's a big one. It's about respect and being thankful to the people who raised you.
It's interesting. That idea of being good to your parents, it's in so many different cultures and religions. It's like a universal thing.
It really is. And it's not just your parents. You should be kind and compassionate to your relatives, people who are struggling, even people just passing through your life.
I'm noticing a pattern here. It's all about balance and not going overboard, not being extravagant, being careful how you use your resources.
You're definitely picking up on the key points. The chapter also says that adultery and murder are completely wrong, that you need to protect the property of orphans and always keep your promises and be honest in everything you do.
It's not just avoiding the bad stuff. It's also about doing good things, being a good part of your community. Exactly. And one of the most important things it says is, don't be arrogant.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic human problem. So easy to fall into that.
It is. The chapter reminds us that being humble and grateful, those are the really important qualities for a truly good life.
Let's be real, though. No matter how good a message is, there's always going to be people who doubt it.
You got that right.
Chapter 17 actually talks about that. People who don't believe in God's messengers and don't believe in the idea of coming back to life after death. Verses 40 to 51, they really get into that.
It's like they knew there were going to be skeptics right from the start.
It's amazing, right?
They don't avoid the tough questions either. These verses talk about all the doubts and challenges people have, but they also explain why those doubts are wrong and reaffirm God's power and how resurrection is real.
What kind of doubts are we talking about?
But some people question why God would choose humans as messengers. They can't understand how the divine and human can be connected.
It's a tough concept.
It is. Then there are those who just can't grasp the idea of coming back to life after you die. And some people demand to see crazy miracles before they'll believe anything.
Makes you wonder why they need those big shows to believe. Is it really about proof, or is there something else going on?
That's a great question. And these questions, they were asked a long time ago, but they still matter to us today.
Oh, totally. It's like they're talking about things humans always worry about. Faith, existence, things we don't know.
Absolutely. We may not be asking for a spring to burst out of the ground, but we all have doubts sometimes, right?
For sure.
And even though the Quran gives answers and reassurance, it also says that we can't understand everything. There are some things that are just beyond our human minds.
Like those verses 84 to 87, where it talks about the Spirit.
Yeah. And it says that the Spirit belongs to God. It's something we just can't fully get.
It's like there are some mysteries out there that we're not supposed to solve.
Right. It's saying we can still try to learn and understand, but also accept that there are things we might never fully know. And in the end, it emphasizes that the Quran is a gift from God. It's guidance and knowledge that we should treasure.
It feels like every single verse is a starting point for a deeper conversation.
It really does. That's what makes the Quran so captivating. It talks to us on different levels. It gives us guidance, wisdom, challenges, all at the same time. For everyone who engages with it.
Which brings us back to those folks who demand proof before they'll believe, even after hearing all this.
Like they missed the point completely.
Right. Verses 90 to 93, they paint a pretty clear picture of what those people wanted. They wanted springs bursting from the ground, gardens popping up out of nowhere, even God and the angels appearing right in front of them.
It's almost funny when you think about it, like, I'll believe it when I see it, but real faith, it's about taking a leap beyond what you can physically see.
Exactly. The Quran answers those demands by saying that sending human messengers is all part of God's plan. We're not supposed to get proof handed to us. We're supposed to use our minds, our hearts, our experiences to find the truth.
You're supposed to think for yourself.
So it's not about getting some crazy miracle to happen. It's about recognizing the signs that are already there, both inside us and around us.
Perfectly put. But what about the people who ignore all the signs? The ones who reject God's guidance, even when they can see it? What happens to them?
Well, those verses, 97 to 99, they don't hold back. Their fate is described in pretty harsh terms.
Blind, deaf, and dumb on the day of judgment.
Wow.
Lost and without any protection, except from Allah, the one they rejected in this life.
That's a serious reminder that the choices we make, they have consequences that last forever. You can't just live however you want and expect there to be no repercussions.
Right, and to really hammer that home, the chapter tells the story of Moses and Pharaoh in verses 101 to 104.
That story, it never gets old.
Classic power struggle, with this added element of faith in God stepping in.
Pharaoh, even with all his power and everything, he's brought down because he's too arrogant and refuses to accept God. It's a warning for all of us. Nobody is above divine justice. Okay, we've covered so much. The amazing night journey, the importance of living a good life, the challenge of doubt, and the consequences of disbelief. But we haven't actually talked about who went on that journey.
It's crazy, right? We've been talking around it this whole time, building up the suspense.
Totally. The chapter starts with this mysterious trip, and now I really want to know who that servant was.
Well, Islamic tradition tells us it was none other than the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Makes sense. Now it all comes together. But wait, what about those mosques? The sacred mosque and the farlist mosque? Where are those? What makes them so important?
The sacred mosque is thought to be the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, the holiest place in Islam. It's where the Kaaba is, that cube-shaped building that Muslims walk around during the Hajj pilgrimage.
Okay, that makes sense. So the journey starts at the very heart of Islam. But what about the farthest mosque? That sounds, well, pretty far away.
It is. It's usually identified as the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, a city that's important to Muslims, Christians, and Jews.
So this night journey was from Mecca to Jerusalem. That's a long trip, even today.
Especially considering it all happened in one night. Remember, the chapter is called The Night Journey.
Right. Okay, so Prophet Muhammad travels from Mecca to Jerusalem in one night. But what happened during the journey? What were those wonders he saw?
This is where it gets really interesting. Islamic tradition says this night journey was a miracle. Prophet Muhammad was carried on a creature called Buraq. Buraq had wings.
Wait, a creature with wings, like a horse with wings?
You could say that. A lot of Islamic art shows Buraq as this beautiful white horse with wings.
Okay, I can picture it. Prophet Muhammad flying to Jerusalem on this winged creature. It sounds like something out of a myth.
It does have a mythical feel to it.
Oh.
But it's not just about how he got there. It's about the spiritual experiences Prophet Muhammad had along the way.
Right, the wonders. Do we know what he saw?
Islamic tradition talks about a few key things that happened. One is that the Prophet went up to heaven. It's called the Mirage.
Hold on. So not only did he go from Mecca to Jerusalem in one night, but he also went up to heaven. This is getting more and more amazing.
It is. And during the Mirage, they say the Prophet met other prophets, like Jesus, Moses, and Abraham.
Wow, that's an incredible group.
It is. And it was during this ascent that he received instructions on prayer, one of the 5 pillars of Islam.
So this miraculous night journey is directly connected to something Muslims do every day. That's a pretty big deal.
For sure. It shows just how important this event is in Islamic belief. The night journey and the Mirage, they were both a physical and a spiritual journey. They show the Prophet's connection to God and his role as a messenger.
You know, what's really cool is how this story mixes the earthly and the divine. You've got these real places, Mecca and Jerusalem, but then you have this journey that seems impossible and a trip up to heaven.
It reminds us that there's a spiritual side to our world. It encourages us to think beyond what we see every day and to be open to the possibility of amazing things.
It also reminds us that faith often means believing things that don't make sense logically.
Absolutely. The night journey is really a testament to the power of faith. It shows that anything is possible when we open ourselves to the divine.
This has been mind-blowing so far. We've uncovered so much about chapter 17. The messages to the children of Israel, the purpose of the Quran, how important it is to live a good life, the problem of doubt, and now this incredible night journey.
It's amazing how one chapter can have so much in it and still make sense.
I know, but there's still more to discover. What else does chapter 17 have in store for us?
Well, it's kind of cool how the chapter tells this amazing story and then gets back to everyday stuff. It's like it's saying, okay, you got to peek at something divine. Now let's talk about how to live.
Yeah, that's a good point. Don't just be amazed by the miracle. Let it push you to be better. So we're back to those guidelines, honoring our parents, helping people in need, being honest. It's about putting those principles into action.
Right, exactly. And it's interesting how those instructions come right after talking about the night journey and the Mirage.
Yeah.
It's like it's saying, look, if the Prophet got these instructions, we should really try to follow them too.
It does give those guidelines more weight. It's not just random rules. It's connected to this huge spiritual experience.
Totally. And the chapter doesn't shy away from what happens to those who ignore those guidelines, those who reject God's guidance.
You mean like verses 97 to 99, where it says they'll be blind, deaf, and dumb on Judgment Day, totally lost with no one to protect them?
Exactly. It's a strong reminder that our choices have consequences, both in this life and the next. We can't just do whatever we want and expect it to be no repercussions.
And then there's that story about Moses and Pharaoh. It's like this classic power struggle, but with faith in God getting involved.
It's a story that speaks to people across all cultures and time periods. Pharaoh, with all his worldly power and strength, is ultimately brought down because he was arrogant and refused to acknowledge God. It's a cautionary tale that tells us about the importance of being humble and recognizing a power greater than ourselves.
I think what really gets me about that story is how it shows that even people in charge have to answer to a higher power. No one can escape divine justice.
Absolutely. And it emphasizes that real power doesn't come from controlling the world. It comes from following God's will.
We've traveled from miracles to everyday life, from heaven to the realities of life on earth. And through it all, this chapter has combined these different threads of guidance, warnings, and inspiration.
It's pretty amazing how one chapter of the Quran can cover so many different topics and still feel complete.
Verses 105 to 111 really capture that feeling. They remind us that the Quran is a source of good news, a warning, and a guide for all of us. It's a message that goes beyond time and place.
It's a message that asks us to think about our actions, to try to be good, and to remember we're not alone on this journey. God's guidance is there for anyone who looks for it, and His mercy is limitless.
This deep dive has really opened my mind. It's amazing how much depth and wisdom we can find in just one chapter of the Quran.
It shows just how rich and complex the text is. There's always something new to find, something to think about, something that pushes us to grow.
I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. What are some of the other treasures hidden in chapter 17 that we haven't had time to explore? Oh, so many. It really does feel like there are layers upon layers of meaning.
Yeah, definitely. We could spend hours and hours, really digging into everything.
We could, and I bet it'd be fascinating. But even with just this quick dive, we've hit on some of the most important parts of chapter 17.
For sure.
We talked about actions and their consequences, the Quran as a guide, the whole thing about doubt, and then, of course, the incredible night journey. It really makes you think about how the spiritual world is woven into our lives every day.
And it's not just about these big ideas, The chapter gives us actual practical advice on how to live a good life, how to be better people, better neighbors, better citizens.
Right, exactly. Treating our parents well, being kind to those who need help, being honest in everything we do. It's like a map for living a life with purpose.
I love that. A map for living with purpose. And I think that's worth repeating. It's easy to get caught up in the miraculous stuff, the night journey and the mirage, but the real lesson is how we use those lessons in our own lives.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we're inspired, we're amazed. Now what? How do we actually turn that inspiration into something real?
That's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing to understand these concepts, but it's a whole other thing to actually live them out every day.
It's like that saying, knowing something without doing anything about it is like reading a book but never opening it. We can know a lot, but if we don't act on it, what's the point?
So true.
Yeah.
And I think chapter 17, with all its stories and warnings and practical tips, it really pushes us to connect what we know with what we do.
It's not about just listening. It's about really engaging with the ideas, thinking hard about them, and ultimately letting them change us.
And I think that message speaks to everyone, no matter who they are or what they believe. We all have the potential to grow and change. And chapter 17 gives us a way to do that.
It reminds us we're not alone in this. God's guidance is there for anyone who wants it, and His mercy has no limits.
It doesn't. And that's a message of hope that I think we can all hold on to, especially when things are uncertain or tough.
This deep dive has been amazing. We've explored chapter 17, found its hidden treasures, and thought hard about its challenging parts.
And I think through all that, we've gained a deeper understanding of the Quran. It keeps speaking to us across time and cultures, giving us guidance, wisdom, and inspiration.
You said it perfectly. So to everyone listening, if you haven't already, check out the Quran, get a translation, find a teacher you trust, or just sit down with the text and see what it says to you. You might be surprised.
You might even be inspired to start your own deep dive.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe you'll be back on the show sharing what you learned. But for now, thanks for joining us on this exploration of chapter 17. We hope you found it as enriching and thought-provoking as we did. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep searching. We'll see you next time.